It was the kind of cold that didn't just touch your skin, it settled into your bones and waited. The kind of night that decided who would see morning and who wouldn't. It's cold. And it's just the two of us in here, the trembling woman said softly. We don't have a choice but to live through this peacefully. Before we ride further into this storm-bound tale, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Snow rolled across the open plains in jagged waves, slapping against Mason Hale's face with a sharp, needling sting as he guided his worn-out horse along the faint scar of an abandoned trade route nearly swallowed by rising drifts. He leaned forward in the saddle, shifting his weight to steady the animal each time its hooves sank too deep into the powder. His coat had gone stiff from hours of freezing wind, leather creaking whenever he moved, reminding him how far he'd pushed without rest. The wind pressed hard against his ears, swallowing nearly every sound except the muffled crunch of hooves breaking through crusted ice. He tilted his gaze upward. The sky hung low and swollen, dark clouds sagging in a way he knew too well. This storm wasn't passing. It was tightening its grip. Out on these plains, a night like this meant death for anyone caught in the open. So Mason turned his horse toward the only shelter he remembered in this stretch of territory, a small trading hut abandoned years ago when the routes shifted west. He had once taken refuge there during better weather, back when he rode with men who laughed around fires and believed. Staying together meant staying safe. Those men were long buried beneath snow and regret. The memory pulled tight at his chest. But the hut ahead was the only barrier between him and freezing solid before dawn. His horse stumbled again, catching itself at the last second. Mason tightened the reins carefully. "Easy," he murmured, though his voice came out rough and scraped thin from breathing ice-cold air for hours. He reached down, rubbing the animal's neck through his glove before urging it forward again. They were close now. Through the blowing white, he could make out the crooked shape of the building, roof sagging under neglect, the door half swallowed by drifting snow. When he reached it, he dismounted slowly, testing the snow depth before shifting his full weight down. The cold shot straight through his boots and up his legs, but he stayed steady. He led the horse beneath the narrow overhang and secured it as best he could. His hands trembled as he unfastened the reins. Fatigue had sunk deep into his muscles, but he ignored it. He had survived this long by refusing to let discomfort take control. He stepped to the door and braced his shoulder against it. The wood resisted, or swollen from years of moisture and cold. For a moment he wondered if the whole structure might collapse at a hard push. Then he drove his weight forward once more. The latch snapped. The door jerked inward. Mason took one step across the threshold and froze. Someone was already inside. A woman sat against the far wall, wrapped in a thin blanket, far too small to shield her from the cold. Snow clung to her dark hair in melting patches. Her shoulders trembled violently. The moment the door opened, her eyes locked onto him, wide, guarded, exhausted. Fear sharpened her posture. She straightened instinctively, as if readying herself to defend against something she no longer had strength to fight. Mason kept his hands visible. He let the door close firmly behind him, shutting out the shrieking wind. The air inside was only marginally warmer, but at least it held stillness instead of the storm's bite. He took in the room quickly. A dead fire pit, feathers scattered in one corner. A torn bundle near her feet. Faint smoke lingered from a fire long burned out. She shifted the blanket higher around her shoulders. Her fingers shook as she adjusted it, and that was when he saw the dark bruising circling her wrists. Restraint marks. His stomach tightened. He'd seen enough of them on supply routes, raiders, deserters, frightened settlers, people bound for reasons both cruel and desperate. He didn't ask who had done it. He only saw that she was cold, alone, and cornered by the storm. He moved slowly toward the fire pit, careful not to make sudden gestures. Her breathing stayed tight, watching every step he took, as if each one decided her fate. Mason lowered himself to one knee and reached into his coat for flint and kindling. His fingers burned from the cold as he arranged dry grass and the small reserves he always carried. Years of traveling alone had taught him that forgetting fire meant forfeiting life. A spark caught, then another. A thin flame rose, fragile at first, then steadier as he fed it carefully. Light spilled across the dim interior in trembling patches. In that light he saw her more clearly. Deerskin layered with scraps of cloth, skin flushed red from hours in freezing wind. The bruises around her wrists darker than he first thought. When she noticed his gaze linger, she pulled the blanket higher. "My name is Naily," she said at last. Her voice quiet and unsteady, yet beneath it was something firm, something that had not broken. Mason nodded once, settling onto an old crate near the growing fire. Mason Hale. He offered nothing more. He rarely did. She held his gaze for a heartbeat longer, studying him as if weighing whether he meant harm or shelter. Then her eyes drifted back to the flames. The shaking in her shoulders eased slightly as warmth spread. She extended her hands toward the fire. They were scraped and stiff, swollen from cold. Mason watched without crowding her. Even exhausted, she held herself with tension, jaw tight, posture alert. He recognized it. The look of someone who expected pursuit. He had seen that look in his own reflection years ago. "I didn't think anyone else would come here," she said softly. "Storm's pushing hard," Mason replied. "Most folks don't travel in it. I didn't have anywhere to stay." The simplicity of that truth settled heavily between them. Mason had spent years avoiding attachments, convincing himself that distance kept a man alive. Yet seeing her like this, half-frozen, carrying bruises and silence, stirred something in him he thought had been buried, alongside the men he once led. The fire crackled. Snow hammered against the roof. He adjusted the logs to strengthen the flame. Naily continued watching him, but the fear in her eyes shifted, replaced by cautious relief. Neither of them spoke the obvious truth. Stepping outside before morning meant death. As the fire grew, the air inside softened from punishing cold to something almost breathable. Nayeli's posture loosened slightly. Mason adjusted his coat, letting warmth seep into his chest. The wind pressed against the walls, relentless. They were strangers forced into the same shelter. Two wounded lives sharing one small circle of firelight. Neither would survive the night alone. The storm intensified after nightfall. The hut rattled violently, boards scraping against one another as snow forced itself into every seam. The temperature dropped again, cold creeping back through the cracks. Mason rose, joints stiff, and crossed to the far wall where drafts slipped through warped planks. His breath fogged in the dim light. Naily stayed near the flames, blanket tight around her shoulders. Her eyes tracked him constantly, though her exhaustion weighed heavy on her features. He tore strips from an old saddlecloth and pressed them into the gaps. The fabric held. Not perfect, but better. When he returned to the fire, he flexed his hands near the heat. Pain shot through his knuckles as circulation returned. Nayeli's lips were still pale. He reached for his coat, hesitated only a second, then extended it toward her. "That blanket's not enough." Her gaze flicked from the coat to his face, searching. Finding no threat, she accepted it slowly. Their fingers brushed, her touch still trembling with cold, before she wrapped the coat around herself. A quiet breath of relief escaped her before she could stop it. Mason looked away, giving her that small dignity. Outside, the wind slammed the wall with renewed force. "It's getting colder," she murmured. "It will," he answered. "Fire won't heat the whole place." She looked around the cramped interior, understanding dawning. "Where should we sit?" He considered briefly. Distance meant losing warmth. Losing warmth meant losing her. "Closer," he said. Naily shifted nearer. He adjusted without hurry, leaving space but narrowing the gap. When she settled, only a small distance separated their shoulders. The firelight warmed her face, exhaustion etched deep around her eyes. When another draft sliced across the floor, she flinched. Mason extended part of the coat across her lap. She looked at him, surprised, then nodded once, trust. "Didn't arrive loudly." It built in silence. "You travel far?" he asked. "Too far," she whispered. "Stopping meant the cold would take me." He understood that. He fed another log to the fire. The warmth strengthened. For the first time, Naily let her shoulder rest slightly closer, not touching, but no longer retreating. Mason did not move away. The storm had trapped them. but choosing to sit side by side, steady and unafraid, that was theirs alone. And somewhere in that quiet glow, Mason realized this night would not pass the way he expected, not because of the storm outside, but because of the woman sharing his fire. The fire settled into a steady glow, embers breathing slow beneath the weight of the storm. Outside, the wind no longer screamed. It pressed, heavy and relentless, sealing the two of them inside, a world no larger than the circle of light around their boots. Nayeli's shoulder finally rested against Mason's, not by accident, not by necessity alone, but because she was tired of standing alone against everything. He felt the shift in her weight and stayed still, offering warmth without claiming closeness. Her breathing evened gradually, the sharp edge of fear softening into something steadier. Snow continued packing against the door, but inside, the fire held. "They may come looking," she murmured, eyes half closed. "Let them," Mason answered quietly. "Storm like this erases tracks. By morning, there won't be a trail left to follow." She studied him in the firelight. "You'd help me?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze stayed on the embers. "You stepped in when someone smaller needed it," he said at last.
"That tells me enough."
Silence settled, not heavy this time, but calm. By dawn, the storm had exhausted itself. Pale light filtered through the cracks in the boards. The world outside lay buried, smooth and untouched. Mason pushed the door open against the drift. The air was sharp, but the sky had cleared. Nayeli stepped out beside him, wrapped in his coat and the thicker blanket. The wind had died. The plains were quiet, a blank slate. She looked back once at the hut, then ahead. "Where will you go?" she asked. He adjusted the saddle straps. "West," he said. Then, after a pause, "You don't have to walk alone." She searched his face, and this time she didn't find distance, only choice. Nayeli mounted behind him, steady and certain. The storm had tried to claim them. Instead, it left them with something neither expected, a shared road, and a second beginning. And on the wide, silent plains, they rode toward it together.